So we talked a lot about different UI components and we got to know what a page is in Ionic. Now let's try to gather all this together and create a new page, and there we'll use the HTTP client to fetch the data from a server, and we'll see how we can use the routing inside the pages to feature our tab or a new page as a tab. So now let's try to create a new tab and add it to our app, and we'll add a new button like the three apps we had. And while doing so, we'll look how we can create this new page in our app. So now let's go back to our code, and here's the terminal. So to create a new page in Ionic, we need to use the generate command line and we can do that using first the keyword Ionic, then G for generate in short, then pages, sorry, the page only, then the name of the page. As we have tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, let's try to name our page as tab 4. Hit enter, and sometimes it will create all the files and make a new folder called tab 4. And as you can see, it has created some file and updated one file, which is app routing module.ts. So let's try to go into this tab 4. Here we have this tab 4 page HTML, which is nothing, but there is only just one iron title, which is tab 4. And we have this page ts. These are the only two files which will be concerned. So, and let's see what's going on in our app. But as you can see, we have created the page, but we don't know how to access it because there is no button to click and go to that tab section or a tab 4. So now let's create so then click on that and we can directly go to our tab 4 page. And we can do this in our tab pages.html. This is where it shows all the details of which tab we are currently on. Basically, these buttons are inside these tabs page. Here we can see there's one section for tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, and there the icon is also given, the iron icon, then the name. So here is the place where we are defining the triangles and the ellipse and the square. So similarly, we can create one for tab 4. I'll copy it, paste it here. I'll name it as tab 4. And for a new icon, we can once again go back to our documentation, and there, if you go on to this icons, it will show you different icons which you can use directly in the Ionic app. I'll use the filled one as we'll go with the flow, and I can choose any of this icon. Let's choose this bag, and you can see the name is bag. You can also copy it, but only if you say the property as name equals to bag, you'll be able to access this icon. Let's go back to our code, and here I'll use name as a bag and change this to tab 4. Let's go back to our application. Here we can see that bag has come and it is tab 4. But when we click on this, nothing happens. But when we click on other images, it works. But nothing happens on this tab 4 because we haven't set the routing yet. The application doesn't know what to do when this tab 4 button is being pressed, what to do when we have to reach to tab 4. So here comes the routing part. So this page is being featured by this tabs pages. So we need to go to this tabs page routing, which is tabs routing module.ts file. And here, as you can see, there are some child routing which says for tab 1, do this, tab 2, do this, tab 3, do this. So we just need to copy this one part and we'll update it for our tab 4. So here we are saying when you go to this tab 4 path, the component or the page which we want to load is this tab 4, and in that tab 4 folder there is tab 4.module, and from that module we need to import the class which is tab 4 page module. So you just need to copy it and convert it to what your tab name is. Let's save our file and go back to our code, our application. And here we can see once we click on this tab 4, it works smoothly. And we go to this blank page, which is nothing but a tab 4 pages. So now we'll try to let's try to add something in this tab 4 HTML page. Within the content, let's try to add some H1 heading and say this is tab 4. Once we go back here, we can see our tab 4 HTML is working, and now we can add whatever element we want. So now let's try to make this page as we want to fetch some data from the server. So first thing we need to do is we need to import the HTTP client module. And how can we do that? To import any modules, we need to go to the app module.ts file. And here we need to import the HTTP client module in this imports list. So first thing we need to write here is HTTP client module. And in the providers list, we need to add the HTTP client. As you can see, it's showing us some error because we have not yet imported this from the Ionic common. So let's import them using this line import. Then we give the name of these modules HTTP client module and HTTP client, and we import this from within a single quote. We say @Angular common / HTTP. So once you do that, there is no red sign under these modules and they have been successfully imported. So please remember to import the HTTP client whenever you want to use the GET request or if you want to fetch data from server. Now let's go back to our tabs 4 TS code, and there we'll use this client module to fetch data from server. So once we go to this tab for page.ts, let's import the HTTP client here first, and we can do that using same way, import HTTP client from @Angular common / HTTP. Now it's not just enough to just import the HTTP client. We need to make an object of type HTTP client. And there's a short method of making an object inside our class is using private keyword inside the constructor. So if I write private, then HTTP and say this is of type HTTP client, then this is a short way of saying that we have created an object of HTTP name of type HTTP client. And now we don't need to define it anywhere. We can use it anywhere inside our this class, as this is a private property. So we have imported the HTTP object, and now we can subscribe to the data and we can send the data to our front end, which is the pages HTML. So let's create some HTML which will be able to give us the access to that data, and will be able to show the data coming from the server. So let's go back to here, tab for pages.html. Let's delete this. And instead of that, let's try to use some Ionic UI component such as ion list. You can look at the ion list in a documentation. It is just a list where we can display the data in a row by row manner. So ion list have header, and it also it can provide a content. So I'll use just the ion list header. Ion list, and then the header. I made a mistake there. Sorry for that. And within this iron list header, now we can give the iron buttons, and these will be the buttons which when you click, it will fetch the data from the server. So we can say this button is get the data, and we can attach a DOM event to this, and we want to attach the click DOM event. So we write in the parentheses click, and in front of it, we write the method name. Right now, we haven't created any method. So let's give a name here, and then we'll create this method inside our class. So let's say run get is the method which will be called when we press this button. Let's go back to our class, tab for class, and here let's define this method. So to define this method, we just write the name in the parentheses. They are empty because we don't want to give any parameter to this method. And in this method, let's first use our HTTP private property which we created earlier. And we write this HTTP, then we say get to use the get request. And then here we give the URL from where we want to fetch the data. And you cannot just directly use this data. We need to subscribe to this data and fetch the amount of data which we actually need to display. So let's also create uh, this one array which will contain all the data which will be coming from this URL which we give here. So let's first review what is the data which which we will be getting. So let's go to this URL, the JSON placeholder uh, type code / user. So once we go to this URL, we get some data like this. Let me zoom in a bit. So there is one ID, then there's name, then there's a username, an email, and the address. And like this, there are 10 users. So we are getting 10 names, 10 usernames, and 10 emails once you go to this URL. So let's try to print just name, username, and the email of a person as a contact. So it will be like when we click a button, then we should get all these 10 contacts in our page. So let's try to go back to our code, and here, so this data will be in some sort of list. So let's say this is a contacts list, and we don't know what form of data it will be. So let's just leave it as any. So contacts is actually a list which will save the data and which will print the data um, onto our front end, onto the page. So let's go back to our front end, and here let's add ngFor directive which will iterate over that contacts list to print these names and the URL, username, and the email of that particular person which we are getting. Now let's inside this iron list only, let's create an iron item. This iron item, you can again look about the an item in the documentation. I'll just be saying it's something which you can put everything in one column. So an item, and inside this I'll say everything is a label. And in the and label, I would say first we need to print with the heading H1 the contact name. So uh, we will use some interpolation here to extract the data from that contacts list. So we'll actually need to iterate over this ng item. So we'll use this ng for directive, and this is equals to our JavaScript code for the for loop, which is let, then the variable name, we can say it is contact, and this contact will iterate over of our contacts list. This is the contacts which we created here. This will be actually a list and we'll be iterating over it, and at one time our object will be of variable name contact. So within the H1, let's use this interpolation and contact and its name we want to be printed as within the H1 heading. Right after it, let's decrease our size to print the username of the same person. Contact dot username, and at the end we can use the paragraph tag, and inside this we can print the email of that person. So this ng item will be actually going over will be in the for loop, and it will iterate over the contacts list to print the name and the username and the email of particular person. And there are 10 persons in our uh, data. That's why we'll get about 10 results. Let's try to give this some fake data right now. Let's say contacts is equals to, and this should be an object, and this object says name is equals to Tom Hank, and username is equals to Tom01, and similarly email is equals to it's Tom Hank at tom.com. So our contacts, we have hard coded the data as one object, which the details are given as Tom Hank is a name, username is Tom01, and email is something. Let's go back to our application and see how it prints this data. So there is some typo in our code in the HTML part. We forgot to add one a curly bracket here. So now, as we hard coded the data as name is Tom Hank, then the username, and at the end, the email ID. And this is the button we added earlier to get this data to run over this to run this get run method. Right now, we have only one data because we hard coded it in our TS code. So our printing part is working correctly. So let's delete this and go back to contacts as any, and we'll try to extract the data which we saw here. So we'll use this URL and we'll go back to our code, and in this HTTP GET we'll add this URL. Now we need to subscribe it. Within the subscribe, we give a function which tells basically the TypeScript code how we can place the data. So we can say the parameter which is coming is data, and this is a shorthand way of writing a function. So data is a parameter which is coming from this subscribe method, and we can say inside this function as this contacts is equals to the data. So we are saying whatever is coming when we subscribe, put that all the object in our contacts. So now all the data which is coming from this URL will be saved in our contacts. And this will happen when we click on when we run this get run method, and this get run method will be run when we click on that button. So let's go back to our application, and as we can see, there is nothing on the tab 4 yet because we haven't clicked on this button. So when we click on this button, this get run method will run. So once I click on this button, the data loads, and this is the data it's fetching from that URL. So we can verify that once we go back to our page here, and we can see the first name is Lennon Graham and the username is Brett, and email is also similar. Even for the second person, it's same. So this is the data which we are fetching from this URL onto our application using the get method. And we use the HTTP client to extract this data from the web server. Let's go back to our slides now. So the first thing which you need to remember using this HTTP client is to import it HTTP client and HTTP client module in app module.ts file. And then wherever you want to use this HTTP client, import it in that particular module page.ts file. And after that, create a private property inside the constructor using private keyword, then the variable name or the property name, and then declaring its type as HTTP client. And then you can use this variable name like I have used HTTP to use the get method and then use the subscribe to fetch the data from anywhere on the server. Let's create a new page, a login page for our whole application, and in doing so, we'll be able to understand the whole routing in Ionic project. So let's try to create some app where a user can give the username and a password and will authenticate it, and then only it can go to our whole application. So let's go back to our code and try to implement this. So the first thing which we need is this new page, because we need some page where we can display the login credentials where the user can put their credentials. So let's create this new page using the above method, Ionic G for generate page. Then let's say the page name is login and hit enter. It will create a new page of and a folder called login in our in the place where we have these tabs. So we can see this login folder. This is a new folder which we got. So first thing, let's try to create the HTML part where we can take the input from the user. So let's just copy paste our card which we used in a tab 3. And let's just copy paste this card, and instead of text down there, we can use the input uh, to ask for user for their credential. Inside the any content, we'll delete all of this, and instead of that, we'll ask for the details from the person. So we can say this is nothing but login here, and the title name can be login for user. And inside the card content, let's delete this text. And here we can use the item, and in each an item we can give an input. And inside this input, let's just specify the first name is for the, with the help of placeholder, we can say the first one is for username. Similarly, let's try to create a new an item which is for the password. And let's have some space in between these two and items with the help of break line, which is PR. So let's go back to our application and see what's going on there. So as usual, we cannot directly go to our page. And if you look in the routing, the app routing module.ts file, this is the tab one. So the app routing module.ts file, which controls the routing for the whole app. Here are these two parts. First one is tab 4 and other one is for login, and one is for with just a blank. If you remember, we created the two pages. First was tab 4 and the other one was login. So while creating, it always shows that it has updated the app routing module.ts file with the update here. So this is the update with it, which it does. It adds this new routing so we can directly go to that page. So if I say go to this login instead of this old URL, just go to login, we come to this login page, which we just created in our login page.html. And similarly, if we go to our tab 4, we can come to this tab 4 section and see there's no button down below, because that buttons were from the tab routing. And this is separate routing for separate page, which we are not interested in. But we can see our login page has been made. Once we click on the username, we can give the username, and after that we can give the password. And we also need a button to submit our details. So let's create a button too. Let's create a break here. And after that, let's use the iron button, and we can say this is enter. So once the app updates, we can fill our username, password here, and then hit enter. And this is where we want the app should go. Right now, when we go to this app location, it automatically goes inside our main tabs app, which is basically our whole app, which we don't want. So uh, how can we shift this view of how can we restrict our app to go on to login page rather than this tabs page? So when I say go to tabs, it goes automatically to our application. But when I say go to this slash login, it goes to login page. But by default, when I go to the localhost 8100, it goes to the tabs page. So all of these settings are inside our app routing module.ts tabs.ts file. So here you can see when there is nothing, it says goes to tabs module. We don't want it. So let's say when we say go to app, then go to that module. And by default, we want it to go to login. So now when we go back to our application, so when we refresh it, when we go back to our localhost 8100, it takes us to login page rather than the application page, the tabs page, we can say. So now there's one more thing to know. When we go to this apps now, let's try to go to the app now. We don't see anything. Why is it happening? Let's inspect that. So we are saying in a routing that whenever you're in the app page, go to tabs module. So let's go in our tabs module and click its routing here. So once we come onto this tabs routing.module.ts file, here we see there is first thing which is trying to say for tabs path, and then there are children path. This means that when the path is tabs and the children's path is tab1, which means the localhost slash tabs slash tab1, then go to this module. So right now in our app routing.module file, we are saying when we go to localhost slash app, go to this log tabs module. And here we are saying when the path is slash tabs. So we don't want this tabs right now. So right now, what, what it will be searching for whenever it comes to this tabs routing, which means it will come to when we have slash app. So when there is nothing after the slash app, and if the path has nothing, then a slash tab1, then it will go to this module, the tab1 module. Let's try that out in our application. So we say when we go to slash app, it should come into our tabs module. And inside this tabs module, if we have nothing after the app, right now we have nothing. And then if we have slash tab1, which means slash tab1, then it should go to this tab1 module. Let's hit enter and we got to our application, the tab1 module. And let's go down below, and here we can see there are some path which redirect it when we go to this tabs only. So let's make it app and let's make this app 2. And now refresh our page and go to our local host, which will be the login page. And now when we add the app, it goes to our application. So this is how the sub-routing and the routing works. First, we dealt with the routing in the app module or the TS file, and then we went inside the routing of this page only. And there we deal with the sub-routing, which happens inside the tabs. Now let's go to our login page and try to make it go and authenticate the user, and on the basis of that make it login to our main application. So let's go to our login page.html, and the first thing which we need is the data binding between this property to the properties inside our class, so that we can get this data and verify it in our class only. So let's bind this with our two-way binding using ng model. So use ng model. First we make a square bracket, then within parentheses we say ng model, and this will be equals to some property. We haven't defined any property in our class, but let's say we'll define it as username, and similarly for the password we can say it will be password. So now let's define this properties too in our class here, username, and it is of type any, and similarly password, and it is also of type any. So whenever the user will put any details in this input, it will go to this property. It is binded to this property, which is username and the password. And let's try to print this inside some function when we click on our login button. So let's try to create a method which can be login me. Inside this method, let's try to just uh, print our username and password. So let's just try to console log our username and password. So console log, then this username, comma, this password, and let's use the property binding or the event binding to add a click event to the button and assign this method. So let's add a DOM event which is click, and this is equals to log me method. Now let's go back to our page and try to write username as user and password as pass and hit enter. Let's try to inspect the elements here. And as we can see, it has printed user and pass here. So our method is working fine and the binding is proper. We are fetching the data in the backend and printing it on the front end. So let's go back here. And now let's try to authenticate our user on the basis of the details it put here. And this is quite simple. We just need to use if condition. And here we can say this username. And right now we are hard coding it, but you can do that and you can put the logic to authenticate a user. But for just a description of how we can do this, I'm hard coding it as user is only equals to user and the password should only be equals to pass. And if this happens, we should be able to go back to our application, which is on /app. This can be done using the routing. We need to import the router from the Angular router. So let's import it using import, then router, and this is from @Angular/router. And we need to create a private object of this router class using the short method of using private keyword inside the constructor private. Then we can say the object or the property is router, and if it's of type router. And here we can use this property as this router, then it should be able to navigate inside the parentheses. We give a square bracket where we can give the location of the place where we want to go if we come inside this if block. So the place where we want to go is /app. So let's go back to our page, the login page, and in the username let's type user and the password let's type pass, and we hit enter. We go back to our main application page. So this authentication is working. Let's go back to our login page. And as you can see, when we type in the password, it displays, which is not very common. This is because in the placeholder, we haven't specified the type. In our input, we have not defined what type of input we are taking. So we can add a type here. which says type is equals to password. And now let's go back to our login page. We can say user, and now the password is getting right. Let's try to give some different username, user01, and password pass. Let me hit enter, nothing happens because it is hard coded on user and the password as pass only. And when we click enter with the correct credential, we go back to our application. This is how we create a user authentication in our simple Ionic app. So we have created the application, but till now it's only accessible on some web location. We haven't actually converted our application, or we haven't got it on our phone. So how to convert this project, the Ionic project, into an application which we can distribute via transferring the APK and actually open it in our Android phones. So let's go back to our slides here. So in just 3 lines of code, you can convert your project into the Android application. This is the power of using Ionic framework. You need not to worry about different things. Just need you just need to have the Android Studio installed in your machine. So to actually process and make the APK for you. So to generate this uh, Ionic, or to convert this Ionic project into an application, let's go back to our terminal. First, clear it. So first thing which you need to say is Ionic, then build. And when you hit enter, it may take a bit of time because it's building all the necessary things which are required to actually convert it into any kind of application. It can be Ionic, it can be Android or the iOS or the Windows application. So it's just building all of these things right now. So once it's done, let's try to see what are the changes it made. Let's close all of these files. And here you can, there is one new folder which is www. This is sort of all the code is converted into JavaScript code. So this is the one which will be used further, which will make our application. But let's go back to our terminal, and the next command is Ionic capacity build Android. This is trying to say that we are making an Android application. So let's clear this and say Ionic capacitor build Android. So if you face some error which says unable to launch Android Studio, you must configure the Android Studio path, or this may happen because the Ionic sees the Android application to be of somewhere else, and you might have installed it in some different location. So I've done it purposely so that you can understand how we can actually open the Android Studio and build this project. So if I go back to our project here, you can see this one new folder, which is Android. And inside this, we have a lot of files. So this is the folder which we need to open in Android Studio. And there we'll be able to run the build command to generate the APK. So I will open an Android Studio and we'll open this folder there, and then we'll see how we can generate an APK. So I have opened the Android Studio in the same location where this Android folder is. It takes a bit of time to actually compile all of the files, and then we'll be able to see what our project is, and then we'll be able to actually build the APK. So just hold on for a few minutes and then it will be ready. So it might take few minutes depending on your machine speed. So once it's done, you can see there's no process going on. And then if you click on this build and this if you go to build bundle slash APK, and there's one option called build APKs. When you click enter here, it starts creating the application for you. So it may take a bit of time again to actually execute and make that application. As you can see, it says build APK generation successfully for one module. And there's a one option which helps in locating your application. I'll click on this locate and it opens up the place where I have this application, which is of extension.apk. So this is the application which you want, and install it in your mobile phone, and then you'll be able to run the same application which we were opening in our browser here, and you'll be able to use the same application on your phone. So this is how you convert the Ionic project into your application, the mobile application.